Excited to share a little update on Hyliion, or for any of you who are new to the story, thanks for joining as well. So for those recently joining, we're a company focused on the power generation market. So on the slide in front of you here, you can see what our product looks like. It's those generators that can easily be deployed outside of a facility, at an EV charging site, at a data center. And the whole goal of this is you now have the ability to make your own electricity locally, as opposed to being dependent on the grid. So these gensets are designed to be prime power, 24/7 operation, as opposed to when we say the word genset, most people think of kind of the emergency backup power. This is really a solution that's enabling distributed power generation. So to kick off today's presentation, wanted to just share a few examples of kind of why is this market relevant, what's happening in this space. So what we're seeing is just there's a tremendous increase in demand for more electricity. You've got applications like EV charging, where one fun statistic there is if you plug in 10 semi-trucks into the grid, those trucks will consume the same amount of power as the entire Super Bowl stadium during game time. You also have data centers, which we're actually seeing as probably being the biggest new consumer of electricity. One of the hyperscalers that we're talking to, they today consume about 6 gigawatts of power, but are vocal about the fact that by 2030 they're expecting to increase their power to 40 gigawatts of power. Now, all this is happening while we're also at a point where infrastructure is aging out. If you look at the electrical transmission lines that are in existence in the US, 60% of those are already at life expectancy. So what all this points to is we need to move to a distributed power generation model where you take a building, a warehouse, a hospital, a hotel, and you actually make your own power locally on site as opposed to being reliant on the grid. So a little bit of background on the company. Thomas Healy, founder and CEO, joined by John Panzer, our CFO. I started the company back in 2015 and took the company public in 2020. We now have headquarters in Austin, Texas. That's where John's sitting today, as well as R&D facility in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is what you can see behind me here. And then in the background, you can see a couple of variations of the product, a 200 kilowatt solution, as well as a multi-megawatt solution. So to kick things off, just kind of starting to talk about, what markets are we going after? So there's really 5 key buckets that we're focusing on. I've talked a little bit about EV charging and data centers. Another area of opportunity is waste gas. So think of gas that would normally be flared at an oil and gas site, or methane coming off of landfills or dairy farms. We also have prime power applications, which would be taking commercial buildings and moving them, off of being grid dependent to making their own power locally, as well as marine applications. So we actually have a development agreement with the Office of Naval Research with the U.S. Navy to look at actually being able to power their vessels off of the Karno generator. So a pretty wide breadth of opportunities here, but what's unique about each one of these is they each have different focus areas of why they're interested in the Karno generator. So EV charging is interested in, you've got a genset that's immediately deployable. Same thing with data centers, but data centers are also heavily focused on making sure they have lower emissions. Versus when you look at waste gas, it's more about being able to operate on various compositions of fuel, right? So if you think about, flare gas coming out of an oil and gas site, the composition of that changes over time. And so your generator needs to be able to run on those various mixtures as well. Versus when you look at prime power applications like a warehouse or a facility, it's really about, can you provide lower cost electricity than what can be sourced from the grid? And then lastly, in the marine application, it's about low maintenance and having fuel agnostic capabilities. So all those aspects are actually being able to be provided out of this one solution, the Karno generator. So what is the Karno? So it's a linear heat generator. So you can see a picture of it on the slide. For reference, it's about a 6-foot long shaft there. So You have 4 of those shafts stacked together, and that's what comprises the genset, or the generator that then gets put into an enclosure to make the full genset. But in terms of benefits of the system, so I mentioned this before, but it's truly fuel agnostic. So there are over 20 fuels that this system can operate on. It can offer ultra low emissions. So think about like NOx emissions would be in the 2.5 parts per millions versus CO emissions would be in the 3.5 parts per millions. When you compare this against like conventional diesel engines, those can be in the thousands of parts per million. So we have an extremely low emissions profile, even when running on conventional fuels like natural gas or diesel. And we're actually able to achieve the most stringent of California air emissions standards with no after treatment system at all. So this is really an unlock from an emissions standpoint. And then superior efficiency. So our genset operates at about a 50% fuel to electricity efficiency. So to put this into comparison, if you plug into a wall outlet, the US average for efficiency, electricity efficiency, is about 36%. So, with the Karno generator, you now have the ability to make fuel or make electricity locally at a higher efficiency than what most of the US grid is. It also comes with the benefit of very low maintenance. So in each one of those shafts, there's actually only one moving part. So when you think about, a deployment of these systems, it's much more similar to how we think about like an air conditioning unit where you put it out back of your facility, it's running all the time, very low maintenance, maybe occasionally you need to refill it with Freon. That's a very similar kind of maintenance cycle as to what we have on the Karno generator. And then it also offers a benefit of being very low noise levels. Similarly, it's actually kind of a very similar noise level as what an air conditioning unit would be outside of a facility. So we then take that 4-shaft array, and as I mentioned, we put it into an enclosure. So you can see here on the slide that box is comprised of everything from fans and radiators and pumps in order to run the system. But then that product will produce 200 kilowatts of electricity. Now, this is really an equation of you bring fuel in, you can use various fuels as mentioned before. You could use pipeline natural gas, you could use on-site storage of diesel or propane. The generator really doesn't care what fuel you're providing it, and then it will have the ability, it then takes that fuel and converts it to electricity at the benefits that I mentioned on the slide previously. So then, as we think about scaling up here, I mentioned the data center market, the oil and gas market. That's where we're seeing a tremendous amount of interest. So 200 kilowatts really just isn't enough power for them. They're talking about tens or even into the hundreds of megawatts of power need. And so that's where we'll also be doing an integration of a 2-megawatt system. Now, what's unique about the way you scale the Karno generator is that as you want more power, you actually just stack more of those 4-shaft arrays together. Very different than if you think about like a diesel engine where you have a 12-liter, a 15-liter, a 60-liter engine, and each of those engines is designed for different power output levels. The Karno generator is really just a modular approach of you stack more of these 200 kilowatt systems together in order to make the desired power output. So from a R&D development standpoint, we've really designed the secret sauce, right? That 4-shaft array. And then as we want to scale power levels, you just keep stacking those together. So shifting here to a little bit about how this actually works. Usually the feedback we get from customers is it's like, it almost seems too good to be true, right? You've got a system that can run on almost any fuel you give it. It's got better than power plant level efficiencies. Okay, so how does this thing actually work? So on the graphic here, you can see kind of a cross-sectional view of that system, the 4-shaft system. So we're looking here at one of the shafts. And what's happening is in the orange areas on the outside, that's where we're producing heat. So what we're doing is we're taking fuel in, we're reacting that fuel through a process called flameless oxidation, and then that produces heat. Now, as I mentioned on a previous slide, this whole generator is powered off of heat. That's actually our fuel source. So what we do is we take the heat and we transfer it into a sealed working gas. Now, the red and blue areas is where that gas is trapped. And what happens is when you take a gas that's trapped and you heat it up, it wants to expand. And so you take that heat from the orange area, you transfer it into the red area of the graphic. That gas then expands, and that's what pushes the piston left and right and back and forth. And you have that reaction happening on both sides, and that piston is oscillating back and forth. So this whole system is driven off of heat, as opposed to when you think about like a normal car engine, you're actually exploding fuel, and that's what's pushing the piston back and forth. So this just inherently gives us kind of a different way of making energy or making power compared to other gen sets. And that's what enables some of those benefits that were mentioned before. So the unlock here, the type of genset that I just mentioned, it's kind of foundationally based off of Stirling engine technology. Now, Stirling engines have been around for a couple of centuries. Hyliion's not the inventor of the Stirling engine, but there's often been limitations as to how do you effectively deploy or create that type of genset. And that's where we've created an unlock here, where what we're doing is we're taking additive manufacturing or 3D printing and using that to make many of the key components that go into the genset, and specifically the heat exchangers. So you can see an example of a heat exchanger on the left-hand side of this slide, where we're able to really push the boundaries as to how efficient and how well you can transfer heat in between parts. And that's what's allowed us to really unlock the potential of Stirling engines. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see just what a 3D printer looks like. So this is actually a picture out of our Austin, Texas facility, and you can see a few of the 3D printers lined up there. So, the best way to think about this is we're taking a technology that's hundreds of years old. It's had deficiencies. We're taking new age technology in 3D printing and applying that in order to create an unlock of this Stirling engine technology. And then we've designed, how do you actually create this, package it, and make it a usable genset solution. So then just looking at what are the benefits of the Karno generator. So, the key things that customers care about is what's the cost of electricity? Is this thing going to be high maintenance, low maintenance? What's the emissions profile of it? What's the square footage it's going to take up? And then also what's the upfront adoption cost? So you can see here kind of how we stack up against the other solutions like other internal combustion engines or fuel cells or microturbines. And you can see in each one of those categories, we're either leading or on the upper quartile of performance. So from an electricity cost standpoint, we've got one of the highest kind of conversions of fuel to electricity. That's what's going to allow you to have low cost electricity, as well as coupling that with low maintenance. That'll keep costs down for customers. And then from an emission standpoint, so we do have the ability to operate on fuels like hydrogen and ammonia, which will enable you to have zero carbon emissions. But then we also have the ability to run on existing fuels like natural gas or diesel, which, as mentioned on a previous slide, we're able to bring the CO levels, the NOx levels, 98, 99% lower than other conventional gensets. Then from a footprint standpoint, best way to think about it is about a third the size of a fuel cell solution, about half the size of an internal combustion solution. And the only technology that really wins in that category or is superior to our footprint is a microturbine. But you can see there are other drawbacks that come with that sort of a solution. And then from an upfront cost standpoint, so to kind of give you some benchmarks, the industry is used to internal combustion engines being in that 1,000 to 1,500 per kilowatt. Hydrogen fuel cells are often in the 3,000 to 3,500 per kilowatt. And we're kind of sitting in between those two is the best way to think about our upfront costs. But as we're talking with customers, I mean, the thing that really matters to them, much more so than upfront costs, is what's the total cost of operation? What's the payback going to be compared to either grid electricity or compared to internal combustion engines? And that's where we're targeting about a 3-year payback for customers. So then just transitioning to a little bit about the company. So we'll be reporting earnings in the next couple of days here. So some of this data will be updated shortly. But as of last quarter, we had about 250 million of available cash on our balance sheet, or capital on our balance sheet. Operating expenses is in about the 40 million per year range, within capital expenses of about 15 million. And then as we look at next year, we do expect a moderate increase in our burn rate, but not a substantial change. And then what we've laid out to the milestone there to the market is really 3 key milestones over the next couple of years. So the first is that we're on track to start customer deliveries by year end here, so just weeks away. The next is we're targeting having low double-digit millions of revenue next year. And then following that, by early 2026, we plan to be at a position where we'll be break even or gross margin neutral on the product. So as you think about kind of like what's ahead, those 3 milestones are really the key things that we're encouraging investors to track. And then just to touch on, if any of you have been following our story for a while, you might be aware that we actually were a company focused on the EV powertrain space. And just about a year ago now, actually, we made the decision to pivot out of that space and focus on the Karno generator and the power generation sector. And you can see on the right-hand side of the slide here, just a little bit more than a 1-year look back at kind of where all the other, where Hyliion was trading and some of the other EV stocks were trading. And you can see that, you know, the EV space has continued to have a downward trajectory in stock performance, versus thankfully, you know, Hyliion has really kind of broken away from the pack and has started trading more positively. So as we look back at a year ago when we made the decision to pivot away from powertrains, you know, we're very confident that that was the right move, and very pleased with the path and trajectory we're now on. So I think that brings us to the conclusion of kind of our prepared remarks for today's call. And then now we'll open the call up to any Q&A.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Thomas. I would request anybody in the audience, if they have any questions, you can submit them at the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Thomas, I have a few questions. What makes your generator different than the ones that the competitors are making right now? Like,
yeah, so it's really fundamentally just a different genset technology, right? So if you think about an internal combustion engine versus a turbine versus a fuel cell, we would be a whole nother category of a linear heat genset, and based off of Stirling engine technology. So it's really just a different type of generator. Once again, as mentioned, this solution is powered off of heat as opposed to like the explosion of fuels and conventional engines like a diesel engine. And then, you know, we've taken the unique approach of packaging it in a way where the only byproduct of this, or the only, you know, kind of output is electricity, right? So, you know, if you think about a internal combustion engine, it's designed for rotational power that then can power a car, versus what this is designed to do is really produce electricity. And then, you know, as mentioned before, what we're doing is we're taking kind of those advancements in additive manufacturing, applying it to this technology, and that's what's enabled us to have this unlock.
right. And what is the plan for selling these generators, and who your customers are, and how many have you already sold? And like, do you have a sales force of your own, or is it through sales? Like, what is the sales go-to-market strategy, if I say?
Great question. So right now we're out selling direct to customers, to end users, and they are procuring the systems. You know, some of our competitors in the space have looked at like kind of just selling electricity, selling a cost per kilowatt hour. That may be something that we explore in the years ahead, but as of right now, we're selling that entire box, these boxes that we mentioned on the slide. We do have early adopter customers lined up, which will be people that are taking deliveries of these systems here shortly. We've mentioned there's some Fortune 200 companies in that mix, so we've got a great group of early adopters. And then, as we shared on our last earnings call, as we look at volumes for next year, we have, as you know, this is a quarter outdated, but we had at that point already half of our volume for next year already under LOIs, or we had LOIs in place that exceeded half of the volume we plan to ship next year. So we've got a great set of interest coming in. And then what's exciting to see is even over the past year, since we made the announcement to move out of powertrains, we've seen a lot of growth specifically in that data center market. And just some of the power levels they're suggesting they need is it's kind of unfathomable, honestly, when you think about kind of the projections of multi-hundred megawatt data centers that are being planned for the years ahead here.
Right. And can you just tell us like what the sales cycle is? And do you guys have any backlog right now? Do you report on the quarterly backlog numbers or something like that?
Yeah, so in terms of the backlog, that's really where we're focusing on those LOIs that I mentioned. So they are, just for full transparency, they are non-binding agreements. They are, kind of before making deliveries, we'll work with the customers to move into full definitive agreements. But I think that's really, us showcasing to the market the demand, the interest that we're seeing. And that's where, once again, a quarter outdated, but at that point, we already had over half of the backlog, or over half of the units we plan to ship next year already under LOIs.
Right. And are you like manufacturing these generators in the factory itself or are they outsourced?
Yeah, so you can actually see behind me here, these are some of the 3D printers that are making the parts to go into the genset. And then we are doing assembly of the generators at our facility. So right now, we're producing both in Cincinnati as well as in Austin. But long term, Austin is really going to be our manufacturing location. We already have a 150,000 square foot facility there to be able to scale up production.
Right. And can you talk a little bit about the reliability or uptime of the production units? Have the units been operating for over 5,000 hours at least?
Yeah, so we haven't yet showcased exact number of run hours, but the system initially was started run. So it's gone through multiple iterations, but the last iteration, really the size and footprint of what we're going to be delivering to customers started running initially about a year ago. We call that our alpha system. That has gone through many iterations, many product improvements, to a point where now it's gone through, hundreds of start-stop cycles, and so we very pleased with the performance we've gotten out of that. And then we've shifted into what we're calling beta, which is kind of taking alpha and making it more energy dense, but keeping it in the same footprint. And that's what we'll start delivering to customers here in the before end of year.
Right. And what is the production capacity and how do you plan to address increasing the manufacturing needs?
Yeah. So maybe, John, do you want to talk about production and scale up of printers?
Sure. And maybe I'll first kick that off. We do, the timing of this is a little unfortunate. We do have an earnings call later the week, and then we're going to be giving a little bit more detail on some of this stuff. So this is a little bit old, but we are taking delivery of a large number of additive printers, but there's different generations of those printers, 3 different generations, in fact, all the way up to GE's latest models. And then even each of those printers, it depends on what part they're printing, and then we're tuning them. So we'll give an update later in the week just on what our expectations are for next year. But that it's a growing number, and so we do expect to continue to grow that capacity as we add more printers here in Texas. But we'll provide some more information on that later in the week.
Right. And what is the biggest pushback that you've got since you've started doing this and have started meeting clients?
So I'd say the biggest thing is just people want to see it running out in the field, right? So we've had people to our facilities to actually see the generator running, but the next step of it here is starting, those customer deliveries, getting it out in real use cases like EV charging or operating on waste gas, and being able to showcase it in customer hands. So that's really the next chapter for us. But in terms of customer pushback on the product itself, they do see it as a premium product, right? So it does cost more than a conventional natural gas or diesel engine. But that is something our customers are comfortable with, because as mentioned before, they're really focused on the full payback of the system. So they're willing to spend more on the upfront system in order to have that reduced maintenance and to have that higher efficiency so that you have lower cost electricity.
Right. And are there any legal requirements, like any certifications or anything like any approvals from the government that you need before you start delivering Karno units?
So you do need to work with the EPA, which we've done, and then you also need to work with the local air quality districts. And so as we actually specify deployments, then you actually need to go to the local air district and get the approval of the generator. But that process is really handled by the end customer, and that's something that customers are already accustomed to do. If you go buy any other generator solution, you have to do the same thing. And then as we look to scale this, we do plan on getting UL certification. And so that's something we're in the process of doing right now. But that is more something where it's customer requested or required, as opposed to required for us to be able to ship them.
Right. And another question on manufacturing is, how long does it take to produce one single unit? And will that change when you increase manufacturing capacity? Like the time, will that change or no?
It does. So production time varies. So I don't know how well I don't think you can see it from behind me here, but the machines you see here are actually the smaller machines. The ones I shared on a slide earlier are kind of the medium production machines. And then we're anticipating getting the latest and greatest machine from GE here pretty shortly. And so each one of those machines has different throughput speeds. It varies. Parts can take a couple of days to over a week to make. So it depends on kind of what part, what machine. And so that's where we haven't given exact clarity on, this machine takes this long to make a Karno generator, because it does vary. And then the other thing that we're doing is we're actually increasing the throughput of the machine. So there's levers you can pull, like increasing the speed at which you weld the metal, the speed at which you lay powder in the machines. All that is variable, and so we're actually continuously going through the process of increasing the throughput. But I think the key takeaway here is additive manufacturing has been productionized, commercialized in multiple industries, in aviation and healthcare, and we're confident it's at a point today where we can cost effectively make systems make the Karno generator out of existing additive technology. And then there's upside potential on top of that of continuing to be able to increase the speed and throughput of these machines.
Great. And as my last question, what are the key catalysts we should be looking at for the next 3 to 6 months?
Yeah, so key catalysts for the next couple of years are the ones that I mentioned on this slide, those upcoming milestones. But
Right.
over the next 6 months, I'd say it's really about getting units out into customers' hands, getting them deployed. And then from there, we'll look to start scaling production and manufacturing of the system. So I'd say, biggest thing, though, is starting customer deliveries, which, as we've shared with the market, we're on track to be able to start doing that by the end of this year here.
Great. Thank you so much for your time, Thomas. Thank you, John. It was a pleasure having you all at the conference, and hope you have a great next.
Thank you, everyone,
Thank
for
you.
Thank you.